Welcome to Rewrite the Mother Code, the show where we can explore our inner mothers to actualize our greatest selves. Through interviews with incredible guests, live coaching sessions, and my own experiences, we're going to dive deep into embracing feminine values and reparenting ourselves. So be prepared to show up, hold space, and be mothered in a way that you never have before, but have always needed. It's time to rewrite the mother code. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Rewrite the Mother Code. With me, your host, Dr. Gertrude Lyons. I am so fortunate to have some of the most wonderful guests on my show. I'm grateful every time. I learn so much. I hope they're valuable, expanding our awareness of all things surrounding our self-mothering, around how much the world needs more mothering, how we each individually need more mothering, and how we can take that into the world. And that's something my guest, who I'm excited to introduce and have you hear from, is Alexandra Ford. And Alexandra, a former trafficking victim turned activist, is coming on the show to share her journey and to enlighten us about, this world that for many of us, we may seem like, oh, that's in some other like dark, far corners of the earth. It's maybe one thing I don't have to consider or think about, but it's actually something that is closer to many of us than we'd like to think. And I think we're going to find out a lot about, one, empathy is always a good thing, right? So having compassion and being open for someone who's, vulnerable enough to come out and share about her experience, and then take that experience so she can inform and raise the awareness of others, is very brave indeed. And I just ask that as we go into this episode, you stay open, look for ways that you can relate. Her story obviously but may not be anything like your story, but that there's always connections, always ways we can explore and look at some things that maybe we don't like looking at. But when someone else is sharing about it, it gives us some distance so we can see where we can relate. We can see just allow ourselves to be with the feelings that we have and look at ways that we, do or do not stay with whatever feeling we have. It could be anger, it could be sadness, it could be just hurt, and I also do want to say, that it can evoke strong emotions. I think sometimes people talking about, these really challenging, difficult, traumatic moments can re-trigger trauma in us. So I also do ask that you take care of yourself. You take care as you listen. If anything does get triggered, that you reach out for the support, any and all support that's in your purview to do so. And I think you'll also find some major inspiration, when we can take really just the bottom barrel, most difficult times in our life and how we can turn those around. And Alexandra really shows us the way and has a way of doing that in this very relatable, beautiful way. So without further ado, here we go. Let's dive in. Well, I am blessed and honored to introduce our guest, the show's guest for today. Thank you so much for being on the show, Alexandra.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I shared, briefly before you came on a bit about what you're doing and the difference and the impact that you're making in an arena that I think most of us would love to think wasn't happening or isn't happening near or around them, but it is, or it's misunderstood. And that's what I love about it, is human trafficking, and which is a devastating topic, to begin with, that we even have to talk about it, obviously, but that it's important that we understand it and have our awareness around it. Whether or not you have children, who knows how this is going to, strike you or but we want to be advocates. We want to be aware. We want to understand possible situations that we may have been in that we didn't realize. And I think that's some of your stories. So it's really huge. And this is what you are out there in the world, vulnerably sharing, your story. You've founded a couple ways to do that. One is Uprising in Wyoming, and that's a whole. I'll have you share much more about it, but that's an organization dedicated to raising awareness, educating, bringing you and others, to the table to help parents, children, people, everyone understand what this really is. And then, through your own personal work with the brand Laughing Survivor. And I know we'll talk about that in the name, where you live in British Columbia. So,
yeah,
you're an activist, you're a trafficking victim yourself. You have incredible resilience and courage to be out there inspiring me and others to persevere and foster compassion, around this very painful issue. So I'd love to turn it over to you, Alexandra, and have you share some of your journey, and let's raise some awareness as we go here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think you just hit on so many of the points that people can't see. I'm nodding along like, yes, absolutely. The raising awareness, the idea that like we don't want human trafficking to be part of our backyard barbecues and everyday conversations. But the only way to make that happen is to first make it part of our everyday conversations, to be understanding what it is and who it happens to. And then we can work towards eradicating it. But first we have to understand it. And I think that is how I can jump into my story a little bit, because I didn't understand human trafficking. So my background, I'm Canadian. I was born and raised in Ontario. Very regular family. I had an older brother, older half brother. My parents were together. I say boring, like boring middle class suburban neighborhood, just like the absolute normal of all normals. And I put that in quotation marks. But and at, I say around 11 or 12 years old, I actually kind of found my calling, which is like really early. But I had a teacher read us a story about a young boy in Toronto who had himself read a story about another young boy in Pakistan who had been exploited in child labor. And when the boy in Pakistan named Iqbal Masih spoke out, he was shot. Now, the Canadian boy who read about this heard about it, and he said, like, what is happening? I can't believe this. And he actually founded an organization called Free the Children, which later became We Charity, which was a massive charity behind the Me to We movements across the globe. It was all about children helping children. So I heard about this, myself and two friends, and really it was this like wild understanding that there was a world outside of my front doorstep, and that world actually wasn't necessarily all that safe. And I was, in fact, really lucky to have what I had: a roof, family, friends, not have to work, all of that. So I became a staunch advocate against child labor and child exploitation. And my friends and I, skipped school dances to collect petition signatures to send to our government. We raised money for school and health kits to send kids who had been freed from exploitation. I just absolutely fell into this advocacy role, and I loved it.
Wow.
Now, about a year or two later, one of my best friends, not one of the girls I was doing the advocacy work with, but another friend of mine, her uncle actually began sexually assaulting me. And that started when I was about 13 years old. And it went on for 4 or 5 years, pretty consistently. Now, obviously, these aren't necessarily thoughts I was conscious of while it was happening, but thinking back and having done therapy, there was a lot in there where I was beginning to understand the world as a young teenager, a young female teenager, that my looks were my value. And at that point, I had, a unibrow that rivaled, Bert's from Sesame Street. I had big round glasses. This is before Harry Potter, of course, so they were not cool. Hairy arms. I was a kid advocate, which did not endear me to my peers. So when this older, good-looking man showed interest in me, I really fabricated this idea in my head that we were in a relationship, maybe a clandestine one, but it seemed
like there was some real
mutual. There was a mutuality to it. And up until this point, my parents had certainly talked to me, and the school had talked about unwanted touch. We had the My Body's Nobody's Body But Mine song.
Mm.
But sexual assault had only been described in a manner of saying no or screaming no or fighting. There had to be a fight in there. And for me, so I never viewed what happened to me, or I didn't for a long time view what happened to me as sexual assault, because I didn't fight. I thought there was this mutuality in the relationship. I was 13, he was 30, so there was not. But I certainly thought there was. However, my body and my consciousness knew there was something wrong, because I ditched the advocacy work. I started smoking weed, falling into a world of drugs, just falling kind of further off track. I kept up appearances really well. So I wasn't the kid that went from being an advocate to, suddenly skipping school and all of that. I managed to keep good grades and keep up appearances. So nobody really knew what was going on. And I certainly didn't either consciously understand it.
Sure.
But I definitely fell into this world of drugs until I was doing meth on a regular basis. And I was about, at this point, I'd say about 20 years old. And I ended up dating the town meth dealer. And I consciously did it. It seemed like a great idea at the time.
At that point, logically makes sense, right? If I'm going to keep, I have this habit now, I have this addiction, right? So that it would lead you there. Absolutely.
And he also had obviously a fair amount of clout in the town, power, so to say. And I had learned at this point that my power, if I wanted power as a woman, it was probably going to have to be attached to a penis somewhere. So dating someone with power was more likely going to get me power or social clout or whatever than trying to get it on my own.
Right.
So it was a very conscious decision. And I certainly, to an extent, knew what I was getting into. The saying, you lay with dogs, you get fleas. Like, I knew this underground world had some danger to it and whatever else. It was just expected. And it was part of the allure, frankly. So our relationship was short, intense, became very violent very quickly. But I thought I had a handle on it. And so when he turned to me and said, hey, we're doing more of the drugs than we're selling. We need to supplement our income. Can you help? I looked at this as sort of a Bonnie and Clyde business partnership sort of deal.
And I thought, exciting, right? We're going to go in business together.
And again, I'd been taught up until this point that my value laid in how I looked. And I had, separated the eyebrows and grown the hair out and gotten contacts and had what these kids these days are calling a glow up. So when he said, hey, you could certainly help by distracting people while I steal some things we can pawn. Yeah, of course I can do that. I'm good at that. I can do that. The problem was it really just took this one co-conspirator criminal act for me to, when he tried, suggested the next thing. And I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. He's like, oh, but do you want everyone to know you stole from them? Like, wait a second. I did? I thought we did. So from there, it really spiraled. And, literally one day we were at a strip club. We used to party there. And all of a sudden I feel hands underneath my armpits and I'm being lifted up off my feet and put on stage. And the last thing I hear in my ear is, don't get down until you've made me some money. And, I had, in the early stages of our relationship, I'd sent him pictures because that's, the millennial love letter, I guess. And he had sold them. And then when I stopped sending him pictures, he took it upon himself to gather them through means of drugging my drinks until I was unconscious and then taking photos and selling them online. I never quite knew the extent of what happened there. And I chose not to dig. I didn't really want to know. This is also back in 2007. So thankfully, cell phone pictures were not what they are today. So all of this, there's so many of these things in which the overall umbrella was he used my body to make himself money.
Yes.
Now, fast forward 10 years, I've escaped him. He found me about a year and a half after I escaped. I finally went to the police. We went through a full court case investigation. He was held in jail. When he got out of jail, he was actually killed in a situation unrelated to me.
Wow.
So that kind of put an end to that. I went to post-secondary education. I got a degree in criminology. I got a postgrad in victimology. I got an honors diploma in community and justice services. I went into the workforce, kind of revamping that I want to help people. I want to be an advocate and activist. Worked in the courthouse with police, with victims, with offenders, all of this. And all I ever understood my experience to be was domestic violence and a series of my own bad decisions. So I wore that shame of, I just made a lot of bad choices in my life. Until one day I'm in Wyoming. I was living there and I met a woman who was doing some anti-trafficking work. And I said, I know nothing about human trafficking, but I'm an activist and an advocate, and maybe I can help. And as I shared my story with her, she was like, he used your body to make himself money. That's trafficking.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, my mind exploded because this is now 10 years after my exit. I've been through a court case. There was law enforcement involved. I have all of this experience in and around this field, and I had no idea. And for me, it was like, if I have no idea, how is anyone else supposed to know? Right?
Yeah.
And that's how I got involved in this work. And that is how Uprising was, co-founded. It was myself and Terry, that woman I was speaking to, who co-founded Uprising.
Wow. Thank you. Is like the first thing I want to say, because I think it would be so easy to experience what you experience. Like, sure, maybe do your own healing, but the courage it takes to then be public with it in the service of helping others is a big deal. Right. And,
Thank you.
And to share, and just even to share what you shared. And I know we're going to get into how you call your brand Laughing Survivor, because, that's an important aspect of, it's okay to be that way, around this, when you have a purpose around it. When you've done the healing and you're not like covering up painful things with laughter. That's not the point, I know. So we can say a bit more about that maybe, but I just want to underline, because I talk about this, in the mothering realm, right? Rewrite the mother code, like what's happening in our culture around decisions we make in that whole process, right? Just the fact that we think mothering is exclusive to women who have children, when no, actually we all mother, right? And then there's all those decisions that you can make. And I'm not putting this at the same level, but I want to like generalize it in a way that this is why I think, again, it's so important, is when you don't know, and you don't know you have choices. You don't know you have options. You don't know, that things may be being done very poorly in an arena in these choices, but it's all we know about. So that's what we think we have to deal with, right? Like with limited knowledge, we're just going to make what sometimes are bad choices and we don't even know it, right? We're just fish in water in that regard. So had you known and had this awareness, once you decided to like bring it to the courts and go to the police, that it was human trafficking, would that have one, I know just the knowledge for yourself to know that this, I think the biggest thing, right, is what I'm getting from you sharing is that, I've been holding all this shame. Like, this is my fault just because of the choices I made to get hooked up in this sphere. Yes, he was doing bad things, but I was complicit. But I think it added a layer to you letting go of that shame. But also, it's important that the court system that we know, and when we're trying to bring it to justice, that this is an aspect of that justice, not just domestic violence, but to add this to it. So I know I just said a whole lot. If you want to pick up anywhere from any of these aspects, that would be great.
Absolutely. You nailed the biggest thing, was the shame. I thought, and it was treated as, what I had experienced was domestic violence and a series of my own bad decisions. Because I had consented to the original request, which was, hey, can you distract people while I steal from them? I didn't understand that. For me, it was like a slippery slope. I said yes to this, so I'm at fault for everything that came after that. I didn't understand that the emotional and physical violence I was experiencing meant that I was coerced, and coercion and consent can coexist. And if they do, the coercion voids the consent. And this is a subject and an area that I talk about, and I one of the hills I will die on, because it is one of the most complex ideas when it comes to consent surrounding sexual intimacy. It's again the idea, I understood sexual assault to happen if someone was screaming no and trying to fight. That narrow-minded, that myopic idea of what sexual assault meant that even though part of me absolutely knew that there was something wrong with what was happening with my friend's uncle, I wasn't screaming and fighting and saying no.
Yeah.
So I again wore that blame. And even in the way, so we did go to court against him. And even in the way, I remember his defense attorney asking me a question, weren't you excited by an older man being interested in you? Well, yeah, I was 13. That shouldn't have been on me.
Right.
But I wore that. And I had, at that point, done a fair amount of therapy to take that off. And just having that defense attorney reflect my own thoughts back to me at that time reminded me how much stigma and how much victim blaming exists in this space still.
Yeah.
When it comes to trafficking, like, I think, I can't say we all know, but it's becoming fairly, I think, common knowledge to understand the stigma that people who experience sexual violence have to deal with and the victim blaming and all of that.
Sure.
Human trafficking is on a whole other level. It is still so dark and underground because people don't understand what human trafficking is.
Right.
And there's
I
still
didn't
so
until I
exactly,
I mean,
right?
well, I thought I did, but and maybe you can say more about this, but of course we only have a Hollywood, or I guess
Yes.
I'm going to call it worst case. I don't know, the like explicit, like stealing a child from their home and putting them in a, in a situation, right? Like, I think that's generally how I had understood it until
Oh,
now.
me too. The movie Taken, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's like somebody's stolen. There's a lot of, screaming white van, whatever it is. And it's usually a large crime ring. They're transported over a border of some kind. Maybe there's a shipping container involved, like something like this is the image that people have of human trafficking, when in reality, it can be in your own neighborhood, a boyfriend saying, hey, we're not going to make rent this month. Can you go see if you can like shave a couple $100 off by spending an hour or two with the landlord? That right there, depending on the circumstance, it like details and all, but that can be trafficking. So we need to, that's one of the big awareness things, is to bring more awareness to it. So both awareness helps to counteract shame and stigma. And not just so the community knows what human trafficking is, but so people who are being trafficked go, oh, this isn't my fault. Okay, I have somewhere I can turn. They're not just going to be like, well, you made some bad choices. So you got to, you made your bed. Now you got to lie in it.
Like you're complicit. And I just think that is so important and critical, especially in this arena where it's still, I say still, like, I don't know. I do hope there'll be an end, to this stigma, as you said, but, myth or belief that like it's the woman, somehow it ends up like the woman's fault, or I'm going to say women because we're women. But obviously it's not gender specific in this regard because young boys are exploited as well. But that understanding, like that can be just enough for somebody to hear, to then look at a situation that they may be in that someone has told them is fine, or it's this, or they're manipulating them in some way that they've rationalized, but known it's not okay, but somehow rationalized, like you were saying, right? In your situation, like, well, and this is where I think it gets tricky too, because, like with you, with your uncle, like the attention feels good. Like to have an attractive older man, like pay attention to you when you're dealing with other stuff in your life, like can feel good. Right. But then that gets turned against us. Right. Because like you said, like it doesn't matter. It's wrong and it's against the law. And that has nothing to do with like what's wrong about it. Right. I mean, I think about other things like raising awareness, particularly with teens, like mad, and drunk driving, and I mean, my kids who are grown now, but it was very clear that you don't drink and drive. Like, and there was nobody argued that. Nobody tried to rationalize it. It had been, educated significantly to them. And then one day they were talking, I hear them talking, and they're like, in what context? I can't remember exactly, but in some context, they were talking about somebody who was driving while they were high on weed, but that was okay. Like what I said, that's not okay. Like they're impaired. They're like, wait, no, it's just weed. It's not, they weren't drinking. Like it was that fine of a line. Like, okay, we know drinking isn't, but nobody told us weed wasn't, going to possibly impair our driving decisions.
Yeah.
So we have to get that explicit in it, especially with the teen mind, let alone then us, as adults who want to just then block out anything like that as a reality, right? We just don't
hmm
want to grasp it. It's a reality. And I think that's why it's so important to put it like, and I don't mean to make this sound like negative, but in our faces. Like we have to have this in our face or we won't recognize it when it's possibly going on right around us. And as I'm sorry, because there's things I've read or listened to, and I'm not sure if you have already said it, but how often things like this mostly happen with people that right? Or this isn't the random person that comes and steals you off the street. That's probably like it happens, but way, way less than somebody getting into your life. And I'm just wondering, well, first, if comment on that and then share when you're educating, like how, you kind of bring to light, like what are the things to look for? What are the signs that, so we can all be, mothers to our own children, mothers to others' children, and to ourselves, if we've gone through it and didn't realize what something that we've been through could be this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So I think one of the myths, like or kind of overarching myth that
Mhm.
I always want to bust and I will shut down as quickly as I can is I always see these things that go around the internet that say if you find a rose under your windshield wiper, or traffickers will put peanut butter on your door handle or something, like these just super random weird things. The idea is that someone will target your car in a public open space like a mall parking lot or something like that, somehow target you randomly like that. As you pull out, you will not know you're targeted until whatever it is you go to clean your windshield and peanut butter smears across it. So now you have to pull over to clean it, and at this point they'll come and they'll snatch you and take you away. So, and it's so many different versions of this,
Wow.
but the idea, the crux of it, like comes down to the white van snatching a kid off the street corner or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to shut that down. So that I'm not saying it never happens. I'm saying in all of the work I've done and all of the work my colleagues have done, both law enforcement and survivors and victim advocates, I would dare say it is about 1% to less than 1% of cases we deal with. Less than
Wow.
1%.
And that's what we see. That's
That
what
is what
gets
you
published
see.
as how you're supposed to protect yourself. Wow.
Yes. And that's not going to be helpful. So I can tell you a little bit about how to protect yourself and how to look for
Sure.
signs.
Yeah.
So protect yourself, your loved ones, your community, all of that is going to be first and foremost, talk about consent. Talk about what consent is, because consent is not just someone not saying no, right? We need to, it's no longer no means no. It's now yes means yes. And that yes needs to be freely given. It needs to be reversible. It needs to be informed. It needs to be enthusiastic, and it needs to be specific. So we need to be understanding consent from a very, very, very young age. That's something. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I already talk to them about consent. I don't necessarily talk to them about consent in a deep sexual manner, but
Sure.
when my son steals his sister's toy, like, oh, did you ask her consent before you took that? It doesn't need to be a word that is steeped in, sexuality or anything like that. It means permission.
Well,
So
normalize it. You're normalizing
exactly.
that word. So then our brain, everything is going to feel much more free to use it. And doesn't have to distinguish, right? Like
Doesn't get kind of shoved in that corner of that thing we talk about once every 3 years where everyone's deeply uncomfortable and tries to end the conversation as quickly as possible. The other thing is, I am not someone who believes in teaching from fear. I teach using connection and laughter. That's part of the laughing survivor thing. When it comes to online safety with kids, I do have to inject a little bit of fear in there because people need to understand the risk they're taking. So when I'm telling you your kid is not going to get snatched off the street while they're walking to school, or the likelihood is, less than 1%. What I will tell you is that law enforcement I've worked with, or people who work in the internet crimes against children division have told me that if your child has an online presence, whether that is because they have their own phone and social media or because you are posting them on yours, it is not if a predator sees them, it is when. They will be seen by a predator online. Now, does that mean throw your phone in the fire and never post anything? Not necessarily. Does it mean I'm shaming you if you do choose to post pictures of your kid? No. I'm saying be smart about it. So the first thing, back to school time is now, right?
Right.
Please do not post a picture of your kid holding a little board saying, this is my name. I'm this years old. This is the school I'm attending. This is my teacher's name. This is what I want to be when I grow up. This is my favorite color. Like all of this, because guess what? You have just handed someone a bunch of information that, especially younger kids, if they come up and someone comes up and says, hey, your mom sent me, I'd love to get to know you more. Oh, I know you go to this school, or they message them online. They have all this information about them. So when we say it's not a stranger that's going to snatch someone off the street, it's because it could still be a stranger, but that stranger is going to spend some time getting to know the person, whether it's a kid, young adult. That's part of the grooming process. They want to know what's going on in this kid's life. They want to know what makes them vulnerable. They want to know who the closest people are to them so they can start distancing them from those people. So when you have your child is old enough, whatever age you deem them old enough to have their own cell phone, my best advice is you teach them how to use that cell phone the same way you taught them how to cross the street when they were little. You didn't just one day say, well, you've got legs and there's a street, like, hope you do well. Good luck.
Right.
And watch them scurry across the street and just hope it all works out. You're holding them in your arms. Next, they're walking, but you're holding their hand, probably grasping their wrist so they can't let go.
Right.
And then maybe they're walking beside you. And then as the trust builds, and then if they start darting away from you, you're going to go back to holding their hand until you trust them again that they're going to stay with you.
Sure.
Online safety, same thing. Don't just hand them the device and say, well, good luck. You say, hey, this is, a cell phone. This is how you use it. They probably already know and are going to teach you some things realistically.
Right, exactly.
But have some pretty tight rules. Hey, that cell phone does not go into your bedroom. It charges on the kitchen counter at night. After you go to bed, I will be going through it. I'm going to be looking through the apps. I'm going to be looking through your DMs. Be transparent about it because you don't want to break trust by doing it all sneaky like.
Sure.
But you want to earn my trust with this device. I need to see what's going on. And if there's anything in there that worries me, we're going to have a chat about it. Then as they get older, as they earn your trust, as you see more and more, it's innocent. They're not posting things. They don't have a Finsta or a fake Insta where they post things that they don't want their family to see.
Yeah.
Then maybe they get a little bit more trust and you say, okay, I'm no longer going through your cell phone, or I'm only going to do it once every 3 months, or we're only going to do it together in the same room. But I would still recommend keep cell phones and iPads out of bedrooms and bathrooms because we know that where that's, a lot of pictures are taken until they're old enough that you have that trust and they have that understanding. We need to know that instead of putting all of our fear into a stranger snatching a kid or a vulnerable person off the side of the road, these devices invite them into our homes, invite potential strangers into our homes, and it gives them the connection to turn themselves from a stranger into a trusted confidant. And that's what you need to be concerned about, is not the stranger on the road, is the stranger in your kid's cell phone becoming their trusted confidant, especially because we share so much. We share so much online, and you don't even realize how much you're sharing. You don't realize that picture you took, of your kids running towards you after their first day of school shows their school uniform, and that shows where they're at. So someone messaging them, oh, I have a kid who goes to that school. Do you know so-and-so? No? Oh, well, they're a year or two ahead of you. Just those little connections make us feel like, oh, this person's not a stranger. They're safe. And as soon as they formed that initial bond, that's where deeper bonds can be formed. So those are the things you need to be looking out for.
Hi, I'm so excited to share with you my 2024 Spring Equinox Self-Mothering Retreat that's happening this March 2024. And I would love for you not only to consider it, but to attend. But in considering it, hey, just knowing that you would be leaving cold weather if that's the space that you're in and coming down to just magnificently beautiful, warm, nourishing place of Zihuatanejo, Mexico. Zihuatanejo meaning land of the goddess women. And coming to really take time for yourself. Okay. And that I am learning more and more isn't just a nice thing to do or something extravagant or something selfish. It's essential. And I really want you to take it seriously, to consider, just think about what would it take for me to go. It's a 5.5-day retreat, getting from where you are, getting there, landing there, and then being in a space that is all about you. It's all about nourishing you. It's all about tuning into you, using everything around us, the nature, the food, the beautiful people, the rituals, ceremonies. I bring it, we really bring it. And we go deeper and deeper as the days go on, and we release, we let go, we bring in what is nourishing, what is empowering, what is that space of just really divine feminine energy. And we do it in the community of women. It's not for everyone. I will be honest, if the idea of leaving and not making it work, or it's just too hard, not for you. If the idea of, spending that amount of time inwardly focused and going to that level of self-awareness doesn't sound like something you're willing to do or put the time and energy into, then it's not for you. And it's good to know that, right? So this is for people who are serious about what it means to mother themselves, what it means to take time for ourselves, and that gift and what that gift can bring to us. It was originally right after my fall retreat. It filled right up. But now some people, it turns out, are not able to come. So I do have a handful of openings. And if you're listening to this and you're willing to take that step, please reach out to me. We can do a discovery call, or you can put a deposit down. I would love that. And you can do that by going to my website, www.drgertrudelyons.com. Go to events, and there you go. It'll all be there. There's a beautiful page there for you to explore. I look forward to hearing from you and then seeing you on my spring retreat. No, thank you so much. Because I know, I'm past that age, and oh my God, I'm so grateful for so many years of my children's upbringing. We didn't have social media wasn't a thing. So when they were little, right? But then as teens, and I did see some things happening. But I just look back and grateful, because I didn't have all of this information, or go to at that extent. That didn't happen. Just feels sometimes like luck, right? I'm grateful because, and I think that's where we have to watch. That takes time to. And they're going to resist. They're not, most kids, especially when they get to be teens, are not going to be happy about you having their cell phone, or saying you're going to look. This takes, building a relationship, and you being willing, especially when they get to be teens, to be the bad guy, to have them not like you because of it, because it's really our job to keep them safe, not have them like us. Right. And I think that's what is so powerful about what you're saying, and being that person that it is somewhere where it's we do need to be a little paranoid. We don't need to be obsessed by it. We don't, we don't have to 24/7 check their phone or, hover. We want to build some trust. But I like what you said. It's it starts out pretty intense, but then they build trust with you. And this is a great arena and place to do that, to build that trust, and yay, it helps keep them safe. Right. But anyway, we need those ways to build, right. To build that trust with them, and to have that.
I was going to say, and it helps build trust within them as well, for themselves, trust within themselves as they see that you are starting to trust them. That helps. Oh, I'm trustworthy. This feels good. It feels good to be trusted by my mom or my dad or my aunt or my uncle or whoever. It feels good to know that I have them to turn to. They have my back, but I've demonstrated that I'm trustworthy, and they're now giving me, a little bit more space. And I think that building of trust in oneself is so critically important for all teens, and especially for women, for girls, because we're taught not to trust ourselves from a really young age, right? We're taught to lose our voice, to not speak up, well, come on, that boy's not being mean to you. He likes you. Like, that was mean. He's being mean. But no, someone knows better. So that's what happens when you have somebody online who's trying to, say, groom a teenage girl. They may know in their gut something's not right, or this person's kind of giving them the heebies or whatever it is. But also, I want to be cool. I want an older boyfriend. He's buying me new shoes, like whatever it is. So you're shoving that gut feeling down and not trusting yourself, learning to quiet the trust you should have in yourself. So by demonstrating it as parents or caregivers, I trust you to trust yourself. I trust you to come to me or another trusted adult if something doesn't feel right. And you lay that groundwork. So not only are you building trust between you and them, you're helping them foster that trust within themselves, which is huge, especially in a world that is trying to teach them constantly, like, someone else knows better.
Someone else knows better. There's an expert on this, or I'm an authority, or I'm an adult. So yeah, you may have this like feeling, but that doesn't mean anything.
You're just a kid. What do you know?
You're just a kid. Well, they won't say necessarily you're just a woman, or that's just but we know, we've been trained to say like, oh, that's like a woman thing, and
you're too emotional,
all of those that, and just to, hear you talk about that and see like this arena that, by not having that, it's not just something, honoring our intuition and honoring, our emotions and these feminine aspects or yin aspects of ourselves, because it's more empowering. It's like, this is like safe, it also just for our pure safety. We need to follow that, and honor it. And I think, and I've heard a little bit in some ways that you said this, like, and you said with your 2 and 4-year-old, there's ways that we're using the word consent. And then there's also ways, I'm assuming it's in those early years that we want to normalize intuition too, right? Like, and value it in our children, and value that when something doesn't feel right, like, let's talk about it. You want to trust that part of yourself, and to foster that trust early on. So when they, get to the teen years where it can really have even a more significant impact, that we're more prepared, like that we've built that, like that. I just love that so much. And then that's going to carry on. Like, hopefully we won't need it in the worst case scenarios, but it's going to help us in every scenario in our life, as we're making choices, as we're making decisions, and partners, and, even when they're not dangerous situations, they're important situations, right?
Absolutely.
The school we're going to go to, the friends we're going to keep, right? The choices we're making around what it means to be cool as a teenager, and things we're going to be a part of, like trusting that intuition. So the value is exponential, in this. And you said something that this wasn't related to the intuition so much, but you gave an example, and I'd love for you to share it here, around the consent and the saying no. And I think it was around tickling, like your child. Tickling. Yeah. Because I thought that was a great example, to like a physical example of how we can keep doing this.
Absolutely. So it's something I do with my kids at their age, and it's sort of the perfect age to start introducing it. So my son will come to me like, tickle me, mama, tickle me. Like, okay, sure. So I'll tickle him. And like any kid or any even adult, right? You tickle and you move away and say, no, no. And so whether he says no or he moves his body away or something, I'll say, oh, I'm noticing you're moving your body away from my hands, or I hear you saying no, or I heard you say stop touching or stop tickling. So mama's hands are up. And he'll be like, what? No, keep tickling. And I'm like, oh, okay, thanks for letting me know. I was noticing that your body seemed uncomfortable. And I know this sounds like, trust me, I know this sounds overly scripted to some people, or they're like, why can't I just tickle my child? They want to be tickled. The point isn't that you can't just tickle your child. And I'm not saying you have to use this sort of script every single time, but if you use it, they start to understand. And eventually, with my son, I did it, and he just kind of like, no, keep tickling, keep tickling. And then the next time I said, oh, I heard you say stop. And I said, when you say stop to somebody's hands touching you, they should be stopping, huh? Yes. And then I had friends, by the house, friends of friends, and
Mhm.
I think they were play fighting or something, and they flipped him upside down, and he was having fun until he wasn't. And he said, stop. And the adult male, didn't. He's like, oh, you're still having fun. You're still having fun. And my son was like, no, when I say stop, you have to stop touching my body. And I was like, yeah, kid. Like, uh-huh, exactly. So it's these little things. Even another example I've used is if you do pictures with Santa Claus
Mm.
and your kid is, having an absolute meltdown about having to sit on Santa's lap. You really want that picture. I'm not saying after standing in line for 3 hours and you've got them in their outfits or whatever it is, you're
Right.
like, oh, okay, well, you don't wanna, let's go on home. You can say, okay, well, we are here, we're doing this. This is a family tradition. However, if you don't want to sit on Santa's lap, would you like to stand next to him? What are the
Mhm.
other options? What about
Yeah.
when friends or relatives come to visit and you've got grandma who really wants a kiss because grandma absolutely adores these kids, but these kids are like, hey, I see you once a year. I'm like, I don't really know and love you the same way you know and love me.
Mm.
Okay, well, you still have to be polite. When people come to our house, we say hi to them, right? Do you want to
Yeah.
fist bump? Do you want to wave? Do you want to just use your voice to say hi? You do have to be polite, but no, you don't have to hug or kiss people. You don't want to. These
Mhm.
little nuggets, you're planting seeds. So then when you have if this seed has been planted from the age of 3 till 13, and someone's out on their
Reinforced.
first
Yeah.
date and they go and their date leans in for a kiss, instead of feeling that societal obligation of like, well, I don't want to be rude, I
Mhm.
guess I should kiss them. You can go, I know it has been so ingrained in me that I don't have to hug or kiss people I don't want to hug or kiss. So, you know what? Not feeling it. How about a hug, or how about nothing, or
Yeah.
whatever it is?
Yeah.
Those little lessons, I get pushback all the time that they're like, you got to be kidding me. Like, it's a 4-year-old. Who cares? And I'm like, because I'm not teaching the 4-year-old.
I
I'm
know.
I'm also teaching the 6-year-old and the 8-year-old and the 14-year-old. I'm teaching all of them along the way
Yeah.
that they have rights to their body.
Right. And if I don't wire it in now, before the age of 6, like it's much, much harder. Like, cause I'm thinking about as you're
Yeah.
talking, like, God, what a gift. And I don't care if it's awkward or scripted or, like do it, right? Like you'll get more comfortable, at it and it'll feel more natural to like, but if when we didn't get it ourselves, right, it is going to feel
Mm.
awkward when our parents didn't take us through honoring our choices or who we're touching. It's like, yeah, no, do it. Like, no, yeah, you just sit on my lap and get tickled, even though, you're saying stop. Like, no, I
Hmm.
don't know.
Yeah.
I wish someone had done that for me, but I didn't have it. But I can also give it to myself in ways as I'm giving it to my children. Right. I can affirm that part of myself. And I'm thinking about as you're saying that, like, yes, when we're around children and introducing this work and what you're doing at that age, so critical. But if we didn't have it, it's later and we still have a hard time saying no or setting those boundaries, we can, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's what's so beautiful. We don't have to stay stuck in that mindset or driven by that old belief. We have to recognize it. And that's what we're talking about here. Raise that awareness. Like, oh, you mean I could have a choice in that? Or, I have more agency than I realized, or I could do what I'm telling my children to do myself.
Yeah,
That's probably going to
absolutely.
teach them as well as anything. Right. And obviously you're a explicit model for it, for them. But I think that's part of the game also for us, whether we experience it or not. Like we can be advocates for ourselves. And as we're working on it ourselves, it'll have the impact on them. Well, thank you so much again for the conversations. We're not quite done, but I realized like, oh my gosh, I said this to you like before we got on. I'm like, it's always the hardest to end because I can think of like 10 more things I want to talk about. So we'll be sure that this isn't a one and only, time that we get to have come on
Absolutely.
because I'm really I knew it was important, but then as we've talked, I'm just like seeing the layers of importance to it so much, so much. But in the meantime, people can learn more about you and what you're doing and find ways to like bring you into their community, get educated, like just all the ways and learn more themselves, all of that good stuff. How best for people to do that? Where will they find you? I'd love for you to say it out loud, because
Absolutely.
even though it'll be in the show notes, I want people to hear it.
Well, I can share myself personally. You can find me at The Laughing Survivor. So on Instagram at The Laughing Survivor, on TikTok, though I'm still not sure if I like being on TikTok. I feel like I'm a little old for TikTok. I don't know. Anyway,
I
I'm
don't
still
either.
learning social
I'm confused
media.
about that.
Yeah, I can't quite figure out why I have to show up in 7 different places and post the same thing everywhere. So The Laughing Survivor, thelaughingsurvivor.com. Instagram is where I'll show up mostly. So The Laughing Survivor on Instagram. If you go to my website, you can sign up to hear more about my book when it comes out. I'm writing a memoir. I'm super excited for that. Now, if you are more in and around Wyoming area, it wouldn't be me directly you're connecting with, but Uprising, my nonprofit there, we focus mostly on prevention education. So we do camps for kids, training for parents and caregivers. We do law enforcement training. We've worked with law enforcement to do sting operations, just all of the prevention and education side of things. And you can find Uprising at uprisingwyo.org. So that's uprisingwyo.org. And
Great.
reach out to them. I'm still very involved with Uprising. You'd connect directly, most likely, with Terry Markham, who's my co-founder.
Wonderful. Well, excellent. So I'm glad to have that. And again, I'll say it'll be in the show notes, but that's okay. People can find it there if you didn't have a chance to write it down. Well, I'm just so like, go you, and want to, uplift what you're doing and acknowledge it. And thank you so much. Last question
Absolutely.
is, I ask all my guests at the very end, what does rewrite the mother code mean to you?
Oh, I love that question so much. Without starting a whole new episode to answer that, I've mentioned my kids are really young, and becoming a mom has easily been one of the biggest challenges for me for several reasons. One, my trauma and what that means, and how I parent, and how I experienced being pregnant and giving birth. Like, all of that became really, really complicated. But it was also, mostly it means challenging the status quo for what is expected of motherhood, from how you're supposed to talk, to how you're supposed to look, to how much you're supposed to love it, to like all of that. Because I have, one of my best friends who I refer to as the Earth Mother Goddess of women, because she has always wanted to be a mom, is everything mom, is just amazing. And then I look at myself and I'm like, it's not me. I don't love babies. I adore my children, but illogical toddler tantrums will sometimes feel like they'll be the death of me. So not loving the first several years of motherhood has been so complex. And so the idea of rewriting that, of saying, you can really not like this. You can love your children and heavily dislike the monotony of having to stick to a schedule and being screamed at and having to reason with someone whose brain is not logical. Yeah, all of that. And know that your time is coming. I know when they get a little bit older, that is going to be my time to shine as a mom. Like that, I'm here for that. Right now, I am surviving motherhood.
Yeah.
I look forward to thriving in it. And I deeply, deeply, deeply hope for myself that when I am older, my kids are fully grown, I never once turn to a young mom and tell her, appreciate it. It goes so fast. Because I find that I get told that all the time, especially right now, my kids are young. And I just want to be like, this has been the longest 4 years of my life. I look forward to the other side. I look forward to every little bit they grow and develop. But I think there's so much, I have found so much peace and acceptance the day I realized I could rewrite the mother code, and I could really dislike early motherhood and know that that doesn't make me a bad mom. It doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that I wasn't cut out to be a mother. It just means that my personality, my history, my trauma, my skill set, my potty mouth, all of these things are better suited to slightly older children. So my time is coming, and I don't have to like every second of it.
Hear, hear. Oh, I love that you're bringing that aspect into it, because I think even just telling that truth is rewriting the mother code, right? And that's the kind of voices we need, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? Is to make all of that okay, and to trust and honor ourselves and our beings, and knowing you've explored why this is challenging. It's not like you're like, oh, this is awful and I'm a victim to it. It's like, nope, there's very good reasons why these young years are extremely stressful and upsetting, and that the two can go together. I can still like love and do so many of the things that like need to be done and be there, but I don't have to like it every moment. And then appreciate those rare moments where it's like, oh, I had a moment. And
Okay,
that
this
can
one
be
moment
enough.
was okay. Let's
Yes.
focus on that. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's and then if we don't even, I can't even find one of those moments, that's okay too, right? But just to be acknowledging and aware of all of that is right on target. And I really appreciate you naming that one in particular, because the narrow version of like what is a good mom is just, it's restricting and like straitjackets all of us, into like honoring who we are and what we are bringing to the table at this particular time and season, right?
Absolutely.
And we can expand it. Well, you're right. It could be a whole nother episode, and maybe that will be part of what the next one is, is on
I absolutely, I'm
together.
like so many things, I've talked about my first book. I have a second book planned, which is literally, I plan to call it I Mom in the Face of Trauma. My first book tentatively called I Laugh in the Face of Trauma. And it is the idea of like, I thought I had this all packaged up. It was on the shelf.
Yeah,
I took it
you've
out,
worked on
Wednesdays
it.
at 9:30 when I do therapy, and then I put it back on the shelf. And then I got pregnant, and it was like someone just went and
The
exploded it.
whole
And it was
bookshelf
suddenly,
comes down. Yes,
yeah.
and it's all
Oh, I thought
there,
I'd
all in your
worked through
face.
that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So,
And they give you that opportunity. That's the gift that they are, right? But if we're
yeah.
aware that that's what's happening, not that. All right.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
Alexandra, thank you so much again, and I'll look forward to our next time together for sure.
Me too. Absolutely. Can't wait to be back.
Wow, I've had some time to reflect and just wanted to say a few words about this interview with Alexandra and just how beautiful but stirring, you know, this topic is, particularly as caregivers, mothers, parents. I mean, I think we can all relate overall, like just, the pain that surfaces when we think about the injustices and any kind of abusive things happening to us, and but then particularly to our children. And but how important it is to surface uncomfortable conversations, to not ignore. And I think that was a big message, from this interview, is to go head on and head into, and not, and I think I want to underline, like, not from this like paranoid, like the world's a terrible place, and, like just to live in this constant fear, but to be aware and to be that bad things do happen, and they can. And while I intend to live a beautiful, safe life, and the world has so much to offer, and the world is a big, beautiful place, and it wants the best for me ultimately, and to really foster a very positive attitude about life and what's possible, and be awake, be aware, be conscious, that other forces are also at play, and other forces, negative forces are there. They're present. To me, it's a real call to consciousness, and just, being present as much as possible in our day to day, noticing, being curious. And then when you have inklings of something being off, or, whether it's in your direct sphere, or in your neighborhood, or around other kids or people, or even family. Because as Alexandra said, she was sexually abused by a friend's uncle. And that's as we know, the most common way it happens is familiarity of some sort. So, again, it's not like we're not going to like trust anyone, but we're going to notice, and we're going to be aware, and we're going to give our kids, just like I love the example of like, we're going to train our children not to walk into traffic, and teach them what it means to cross the street and how you do that safely. It's like, how am I in the world safely? And that I have. And I just love the empowerment, the agency of like, this is my space. This is my body. I get to decide who, how, when, to what degree anyone's going to be in that space. And my space is valuable. I'm valuable. I'm precious. I'm a precious child of God, if you want to look at it that way. And I am going to take care of myself. I have value. And I think that was another big piece that was really resonating with me is, when we have doubts about that, or when as young women or young girls, or I know this is changing so much, but there's still so much debunk and unwire and rewire about our value as women, and that our bodies have value and that we can be in them in ways that feel right to us. And I could relate very much to what Alexandra said. Is like, ooh, when I started getting attention for being attractive, or, maybe that's where my value is, because look at all this attention and affirmation. And if I haven't learned how to affirm myself or provide, my own ways of feeling good about myself, I'm going to rely way too much on that external affirmation. So these are all ways that, we doing that work for ourselves. So then if we're, mothering children or the people around us, we're going to be that much more available to teach and train them. Because I think, the examples Alexandra was giving of how she is with her children, she's able to do that because she's been working on that herself. She's been doing a lot of like deep work along the way in her own healing and continues to. And that's when we have the wherewithal and the knowledge to provide that for our children. So I just thought it was really important to underline some of this. And there's so much more. I'm really taking to heart everything that she said about ways that we can protect, set clarity and boundaries with ourselves, with our children, and rewrite what it means to have value for ourselves, and what it means to, be safe in the world in a way that doesn't rob us of our joy and our freedom and our ability to take part, fully in this life and in this world. So I'll leave you with that, and many, many blessings. If you have thoughts, reactions, please get a hold of me and reach out. If this is stirring something for you, I'd love to support you in that. So please feel free to reach out in all the ways that you can through my website, drgertrudelyons.com, or DM me on Instagram at drgertrudelyons. Blessings. Thank you so much for choosing yourself and taking the time to listen to this podcast. As always, please rate, review, and subscribe to Rewrite the Mother Code. It helps other people who need this message, aka all women, well, actually everybody, men included, to find it. I'm honored to have you on this journey in mothering yourself. Remember, change is uncomfortable, but it's beautiful, and it starts with us. And if you can't wait until next week's episode, follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn at Dr. Gertrude Lyons, or at my website, drgertrudelyons.com, and sign up for my newsletter. I'll see you next time.